What if I told you that just hours before a 23-year-old woman disappeared and was murdered, she sent a text message that said, "Kidnap me again"? What if I told you that this single text message has now become the center of a murder investigation that's revealing layers of complexity nobody saw coming? And what if I told you that this case, which seemed straightforward just days ago, has now exploded into something far more disturbing, with potential accomplices, stolen cars, and surveillance footage that captured what appears to be two people burying a body in the middle of the night? Welcome back to the Kada Scott case, where everything we thought we knew just got turned upside down. If you're new to One Crime at a Time, hit that like button, subscribe, and click the bell icon because this case is developing rapidly and you're going to want to stay updated on every single twist. Let me catch you up on where we were just a few days ago. Kada Scott, a 23-year-old nursing home worker from Philadelphia, vanished on October 4th, 2025, after arriving for her overnight shift at the Terrace at Chestnut Hill. Her car was found in the parking lot, but she never finished her shift. 2 weeks of desperate searching ended on October 18th, when human remains were discovered in a shallow grave behind an abandoned school near the Auberry Arboretum. DNA testing confirmed with 99.9% certainty that those remains belonged to Kada Scott. The prime suspect, 21-year-old Kian King, was arrested and initially charged with kidnapping. He had a documented history of violence against women, including previous charges for kidnapping and strangling another woman earlier this year. Those charges had been dropped when the victim failed to appear in court. It seemed like a tragic but straightforward case of a violent man escalating from harassment to murder. But then, just 3 days ago, everything changed. On October 23rd, the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office approved a sweeping list of new charges against Kian King. We're talking murder, robbery, theft, abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and other offenses. The kidnapping charge was just the beginning. Now we're looking at a full murder case. The medical examiner officially ruled Kada's death a homicide, though they haven't released the specific cause of death yet. But here's where things get really complicated and deeply disturbing. Investigators revealed a text message that Kada sent on October 4th at 10:07 in the morning. That's nearly 12 hours before she disappeared that night. The message was sent to a phone number that police have now linked directly to Kian King. And what did that message say? 3 words that have turned this entire investigation on its head. Kidnap me again. Kidnap me again. Let that sink in for a moment. What does that mean? Was there a previous incident that nobody knew about? Was this some kind of inside reference or joke that went horribly wrong? Was Kada being coerced or threatened into sending that message? Or does this suggest a relationship between Kada and Kian that was far more complex than anyone realized? Here's what makes this even more confusing. Police have stated publicly that there is no report or indication that there was a previous incident involving Scott and King. No prior kidnapping. No documented history between them beyond the harassment that Kada had complained about. So what was she referring to when she said again? This single text message has opened up a Pandora's box of questions that investigators are now frantically trying to answer. Think about the timeline for a second. At 10:07 a.m. on October 4th, Kada sends this message. Then, approximately 12 hours later, around 9:45 p.m. that same night, she leaves her home to go to her overnight shift at the nursing home. She arrives at work. She parks her car. And then, within a short window of time, she's gone. She leaves the building, leaves her car behind, and disappears with Kian King. And just over 2 weeks later, she's found dead in a shallow grave. What happened in those 12 hours between the text message and her disappearance? What conversations took place? What was the nature of their communication? And most importantly, what did Kada know or not know about what was going to happen to her that night? But the revelations don't stop with that text message. The investigation has uncovered a timeline of events that shows this wasn't some spontaneous crime of passion. This was calculated. This was planned. And it potentially involved more than just Kian King. Let's go back even further in the timeline. Just before midnight on October 3rd, the night before Kada sent that text message, Kian King allegedly stole a Hyundai Accent. The car was left unattended by a food delivery worker, and King took it. Now, why is a stolen car relevant to this case? Because it shows that King was already engaged in criminal activity in the hours leading up to Kada's disappearance. It shows planning. It shows he was acquiring resources, possibly for what was about to happen. Now let's jump forward to October 5th, the day after Kada disappeared. At 11:39 p.m., Surveillance cameras captured Kian King's registered Toyota Camry parking at a recreation center, right next to the wooded area where Kada's body would eventually be found. The footage shows two people exiting the vehicle. Not one person. Two people. That means Kian King potentially had help. That means there might be an accomplice who was there, who knew what was happening, who participated in some way. But the surveillance footage gets even more damning. 4 hours later, around 3:39 a.m. on October 6th, those same cameras captured two individuals taking what appeared to be a large object out of the passenger side of the vehicle. An object that was consistent with the size and shape of a human body. They were caught on camera, in the middle of the night, removing what investigators believe was Kada Scott's body from that car and carrying it into those woods to bury her. 4 hours. They were there for 4 hours. What were they doing during that time? Were they digging the grave? Were they trying to figure out the best place to hide her? Were they arguing about what to do? The image of two people spending 4 hours in the dark, in the woods, dealing with the body of a 23-year-old woman they had just murdered, is absolutely haunting. Philadelphia Police Commissioner Kevin Bethel has made it very clear that Kian King is not the only person they're looking at. At a recent community meeting, Commissioner Bethel told residents that the investigation is far from over. He said, and I quote, "We continue to pursue anyone who helped, who concealed, who participated in this act." That's a direct statement that they believe other people were involved. Other people who need to be held accountable. Other people who helped kill Kada Scott or helped cover it up. So now we're not just asking who killed Kada Scott. We're asking how many people were involved. Who was the second person in that surveillance footage? Did they help kill her, or did they just help dispose of her body? Are there others who knew what happened and stayed silent? And how deep does this conspiracy go? Let's talk about what we know happened to Kada on October 4th, based on the evidence that's been released so far. She wakes up that morning. At 10:07 a.m., she sends that cryptic text message to Kian King. "Kidnap me again." We don't know what happens for the rest of the day, but we can assume she goes about her normal routine. Maybe she's texting with King throughout the day. Maybe they're making plans. Maybe she has no idea what's actually about to happen. Around 9:45 p.m., she leaves her house to head to her overnight shift. Her family says goodbye to her, completely unaware that they'll never see her alive again. She drives to the terrace at Chestnut Hill Nursing Home. She parks her car in the lot. She walks into the building. And then, at some point very soon after arriving, she leaves. She walks out of that building, leaves her car behind, and gets into a vehicle with Kian King. Now, this is where the picture gets fuzzy. We don't know exactly what happened next. Did they drive around? Did they go somewhere specific? Did he kill her immediately, or did something else happen first? What we do know is that by October 5th, Kada was already dead, because that's when the surveillance footage shows King and an accomplice disposing of her body. The medical examiner has ruled her death a homicide, but hasn't released the cause of death. Was she strangled like King's previous victim? Was she shot? Stabbed? Beaten? The fact that they're not releasing this information tells me it's probably being held back for prosecutorial reasons. They want to make sure they have airtight evidence before going to trial. What we also know is that Kada's personal belongings were found scattered at the scene where her body was discovered. Her debit card, her phone case, her iPad case, her glasses. These are the small, everyday items that belong to a young woman who was just trying to live her life. Items that ended up in the dirt of a shallow grave because someone decided her life didn't matter. Kian King is now facing murder charges, along with robbery and theft charges. That tells us that at some point during or after killing Kada, King stole from her. Did he take her phone? Her money? Her cards? And did he use those stolen items? If he did, there will be a digital trail. ATM footage. Purchase records. Cell phone pings. All of that evidence will paint a picture of what happened after Kada died. He's also charged with abuse of a corpse and tampering with evidence. Those charges stem from the burial itself. From the act of taking Kada's body, driving it to that wooded area, and burying her in that shallow grave with the intent of hiding what he'd done. Of making her disappear. Of denying her family closure and justice. Kian King is scheduled to appear in court on November 3rd. That's when we'll likely hear more details about the evidence against him. That's when prosecutors will lay out their case. And that's when we might finally get answers to some of these burning questions. But let's go back to that text message, because I can't stop thinking about it. Kidnap me again. There are really only a few possible explanations for what that message means, and none of them are good. Possibility 1. There was a previous incident that hasn't been reported or discovered yet. Maybe King did kidnap Kada before, or did something she perceived as kidnapping, and she never reported it to police. Maybe it happened and she was too scared to tell anyone. Maybe she thought she could handle it herself. This would mean there's a whole part of their relationship or interaction that we don't know about yet. Possibility 2. The message was sent under duress. Maybe King was threatening Kada, threatening her family, threatening someone she cared about, and forced her to send that message. Maybe it was part of his plan to establish some kind of narrative or cover story. Maybe he wanted to make it look like she was willingly going with him later that night. This is absolutely chilling to think about, but it's possible. Possibility 3. The message means something completely different than what it appears to mean on the surface. Maybe it was an inside joke or reference that had nothing to do with actual kidnapping. Maybe it was poor word choice for something more innocent. But if that's the case, why would police highlight it as significant evidence? They clearly think it means something important. Possibility 4. Kada and Kian had some kind of relationship that nobody knew about. Maybe it was consensual at some point. Maybe it turned dark. Maybe what started as something else became dangerous, and Kada didn't realize how dangerous until it was too late. This doesn't excuse anything. It doesn't make King less responsible for her murder, but it would add layers of complexity to understanding what happened. I keep coming back to the fact that police say there's no record of a previous incident, no previous kidnapping. So either that incident happened and wasn't reported, or the message means something else entirely. Either way, investigators are treating this text as a crucial piece of evidence. They're analyzing it. They're looking at all the communication between Kada and King. They're building a timeline of their interactions. And here's something else that's bothering me. If Kada sent that message at 10:07 a.m. and then went to work that night and left with King, does that mean she was planning to meet him? Did she know she was going to see him that night? Or did he show up unexpectedly and force her to leave with him? The timeline suggests she might have known she was going to encounter him, but that doesn't mean she knew what was going to happen. She certainly didn't know she was going to be murdered. The system knew this about King. The system had documented evidence of his capacity for lethal violence. And the system let him go anyway. Now Kada Scott is dead, and we're all left asking how this was allowed to happen. How many chances did the system have to stop him? How many red flags were ignored? How many failures had to line up perfectly for this tragedy to occur? And now we're learning that he potentially didn't act alone. That there's at least one other person who helped him. Who was there in those woods at 3:39 in the morning, carrying Kada's body. Who spent 4 hours at that location, helping to hide evidence of what they'd done. Who looked at a 23-year-old woman, dead and wrapped up like garbage, and decided to help bury her rather than call the police. What kind of person does that? What kind of loyalty or fear or payment would make someone participate in hiding a murder? And how are they sleeping at night, knowing what they did? Commissioner Bethel's words keep echoing in my mind. We continue to pursue anyone who helped, who concealed, who participated in this act. Justice isn't just about King anymore. It's about everyone who played a role in taking Kada's life and trying to get away with it.
Family, friends, and community members came together tonight to honor and remember 23-year-old Kada Scott.
Kada's family has been living through hell for weeks now. First, the terrifying disappearance. Then the agonizing 2-week search. Then the devastating discovery of her body. Then the DNA confirmation. And now, as the case unfolds, they're learning details about her final hours that no family should ever have to know. They're seeing surveillance footage discussed in the news. They're hearing about text messages and stolen cars and accomplices. And through it all, they have to keep breathing, keep living, keep existing in a world where their daughter is gone. What do you say to a family going through that? How do you comfort someone whose loved one was murdered and buried in the woods? There are no words adequate for that kind of pain. There's no timeline for that kind of grief. There's only the slow, painful process of learning to carry an unbearable weight. The community in Philadelphia has been rocked by this case. Kada worked at a nursing home, taking care of elderly patients who depended on her. Her co-workers are grieving. The patients she cared for are grieving. Her neighbors, her friends, everyone who knew her is trying to process the senseless violence of what happened. And women everywhere are looking at this case and seeing themselves. Because Kada wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't in a dangerous situation by choice. She was going to work. She was living her life. And someone decided that his desires, his violence, his inability to respect boundaries were more important than her right to exist. That's terrifying. That's the reality that women live with every single day. As this case moves toward trial, we're going to learn more. More evidence will come out. More details about what happened will be revealed. The defense will present their side. Witnesses will testify. And slowly, the full picture of what happened to Kada Scott will emerge. But even when we know everything, even when justice is served in a courtroom, it won't bring her back. It won't undo the trauma. It won't heal the wounds. So what are we supposed to do with all of this information? What's the takeaway from learning about Kada's case beyond just feeling sad and angry? Because those emotions are valid, but they're not enough. We need to think about the bigger picture. We need to ask the hard questions. Why do we live in a society where a man can be charged with kidnapping and strangulation and still walk free? Why do victims of violent crimes feel unable or unwilling to participate in prosecutions? What support systems are we failing to provide? How do we make it safer for people to come forward and stay engaged with the justice process? These aren't just abstract policy questions. These are life and death issues. And what about that text message? What does it tell us about communication between potential victims and potential perpetrators? About the complexity of relationships that turn violent? About the warning signs that might be visible in digital communications if we know how to look for them? There are lessons here that we need to learn and apply. Here's what I want you to think about. If Kada sent that message at 10 in the morning, and something in that communication should have raised red flags, who could have caught it? Could phone companies have algorithms that detect concerning language? Could friends and family have access to resources that help them identify when a loved one might be in danger? Could there be better systems in place to intervene before tragedy strikes? These are questions worth exploring. And what about the accomplice? What makes someone willing to help cover up a murder? Is it fear? Loyalty? Money? Coercion? And how do we as a society create an environment where people feel they can say no to that request? Where they can call the police instead of helping to bury a body? Where they understand that their moral obligation to a victim outweighs whatever relationship they have with a perpetrator? The surveillance footage that caught King's car is a reminder that in 2025, we're being recorded almost constantly. Cameras are everywhere. And while that raises privacy concerns, in cases like this, that footage is crucial evidence. It's proof of what happened. It's a record that can't be disputed. How do we balance the need for privacy with the reality that surveillance can solve crimes and bring justice? Kada Scott was 23 years old. She had decades of life ahead of her. She could have fallen in love, gotten married, had children, built a career, traveled the world, made a difference in countless lives. All of that potential, all of those possible futures, were erased in one night of violence. And for what? What did King gain? What was worth taking a human life for? I don't have easy answers to these questions. Nobody does. But asking them is important. Wrestling with them is important. Because every time we look at a case like this and just move on to the next true crime story without really thinking about the systemic issues and the human cost, we're failing. We're failing the victims. We're failing their families. And we're failing to make the changes necessary to prevent the next tragedy. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Think about Kada's story. Really think about it. Think about that text message and what it might mean. Think about the accomplice who helped bury her and what would make someone do that. Think about the previous victim who didn't show up to court and what barriers she might have faced. Think about the system that let a violent man walk free. And ask yourself what role you can play in changing any part of that equation. Whatever it is, do something. Because Kada Scott deserved better, and so does the next person who's in danger right now. Leave a comment below and tell me what you think about this case. What do you make of that text message? What do you think happened? And what do you think needs to change? Let's have a real conversation about this, because these are the conversations that lead to change.